I think it was my interest in post-apocalyptic fiction which led me to think of this game I haven't remembered in years. Literal years. It's called I Am Alive and it's made by Ubisoft. When I was 12 years old, maybe 13 at most, I remember playing this, finishing it, either 2 to 3 times, and I remember really enjoying it. I remember thinking that this was very underrated at the time, and nothing has really happened after that. It's just being pushed under the carpet. Not many people really know about this game, and for those who do, they don't seem to give it the most positive reviews. They don't really think of it as a masterpiece, but they will say that it has a lot of potential. And even when I originally played this game for the first time, I admitted it didn't come out very well. It wasn't executed as well as Ubisoft probably intended to. However, it has so much going for it, and it could have had so much more going for it if it were given a lot more polish, if it were given more time and was overall a bigger game. I really think that such an amazing idea, an amazing premise, concept, gameplay that is, aesthetic put into this, the atmosphere, the very concept of how this is one of the most unique games I've ever played, it needs to be explored further. I think that Ubisoft or whichever company wants to pick up the license, and they can easily acquire it, trust me, should do a better job, maybe making a sequel, for example, or another game with similar gameplay but doesn't take place in the same universe. So I'm going to go over it, a little bit about my experience just playing it a few days ago, and tell you what I think of it, and also the amazing concept behind it. I was drawn by the premise of the gameplay, the ideas that they really had sketched out, what makes this stand out as opposed to all other post-apocalyptic video games. So first thing right off the bat, this is not a third-person shooter. It may look like that, and it is a third-person game, but it's not a shooter. If anything, it's closer to a puzzle game. You could say it's a platformer, and that's true, but even that it does different from most platformers, because the mechanics in this game, the dry, deep-cut gameplay, is like nothing you've ever seen before. The story follows our nameless character, and I think it's good that he's unnamed because we never remember his name anyway, following earthquakes in America, all across America, devastating big metropolitan cities. Our unnamed character, trapped in the rubble, seeks to find his wife, who he's been separated from after the event took place, the massive disasters all across the country. In an attempt to find your wife, you come across this little girl named May. You take her to safety, and then after that try to find medicine for her, the medical supplies she needs in order to stay healthy. There's a dark brewing fog, a mist, all across the city you traverse. Staying in it for too long will eventually kill you, as it depletes your stamina. What also depletes your stamina is climbing, something the game makes you do quite often. Half of the game is split up into climbing segments, and the other into survival fighting segments. A lot of these, in terms of levels, intertwine, and some are just strictly one or the other. So the game's two main elements of gameplay, survival and climbing, intertwine with health, stamina management, and item management. As this is a survival game and not the game that you can just, play casually where you have infinite ammo, that kind of stuff, you have to collect lives. These are in the form of cameras. You can get cameras by helping people around you, by donating to them and giving them the supplies and items they need, or just by going to certain areas of certain levels, usually where they're hidden, and picking them up. This means that you don't have to replay the whole level again when you die. If you do die and you have no cameras, no lives left, then you have to do the whole thing all over again. However, this comes down to my first issue, which is that the levels aren't very long at all. So dying isn't that much of a punishment, especially seeing that there's a save point every 10 minutes or so the levels are actually divided, meaning that you don't actually have to replay them from the very beginning. There are also a few examples in which you'll spawn in an area in which you can pick up the same camera again and again in order to gain back the lives that you've lost. So even if you do die, all you need to do is go out of your way to find the same cameras, and then you'll get your lives back, which completely undermines the point of having lives to begin with. This is the kind of game that should be hard. If anything, it's the perfect game to be hard. It should be a hardcore survival game, that's what it is. Unfortunately, it falls flat because I only died a total of 14 times with it set to survival difficulty. And as you can tell by my playtime, it only took me 4 hours to complete the game. And this is coming from somebody who hasn't played it in years. I'm 17 now, so a lot of time has passed. I don't remember any of this, really. I do remember, however, some of the level design layouts, but that's pretty much it. And speaking of the level design, a lot of it is pretty good. A lot of it is repetitive, unfortunately. A lot of it is hazy black and white, through the fog, out of the fog kind of stuff. But it does set the mood of depravity, depression, and collapse of a civilization that was once beautiful. And as you traverse these ruins, this broken down city, there's this overwhelming sense of sadness in the air, and I think they nailed that pretty perfectly with the game's atmosphere. Everybody's starving, everybody's fighting for themselves, everything is in chaos and destruction. It's the perfect blend of misery and human nature combined into one pot of just pure anger. And saving this little girl, this innocent little girl, your only real salvation, your only real hope to keep alive when you have nobody else but the promise of finding a wife. It really is a beautiful story between you and May. It's just a shame that you don't really get to interact with the girl outside of a few choice cutscenes. And the game does do a very good job of keeping you in the moment, not taking control away from the player. It allows you to explore these very big levels, these very open-winded levels, without cutscenes playing in between them. And the cutscenes that do play are very short, they're very brief, very to the point.
There's no one here. I don't like it. But May seems to know the place.
You there? Did you make it?
May, can you hold this for a second? Yeah, we're here, as promised.
You're an honorable man. So am I. Your stuff is on the table behind you.
Is May gonna be okay here? Where's her mother?
I don't know. I wish I did. Anyway, thanks for your help. You're free to go.
All right, May. Looks like I have to go. Can you give me my toy back? Look, you sure she's gonna be okay? She just lost her mother.
Well, actually, there is something else you can do. We need you to get something for us.
Get something?
A radio transmitter.
A radio transmitter? Why can't you get it yourself?
Isn't that pretty? Henry! Henry!
Because I can't.
I like this, it keeps you in the mood. But as I said, the game's way too short. I remember on my first playthrough years ago, I think I clocked it in on 6 hours, and I wasn't playing on survival difficulty. Now, I was playing on survival difficulty, and for some reason it's shorter, only 4 hours. And that comes from somebody who was properly experienced in the game, going over every little nook and cranny and going into areas that you wouldn't even go into otherwise. There's actually this whole area in the game that you can miss, in which you can acquire a shotgun, and the shotgun's actually really cool. It's just a shame that there's not anything more than that. That's pretty much it. Sure, you can explore the wasteland, but it's all a hazy, foggy mist. There's nothing to see beyond the blocked off regions that you can't access. To the game's credit, it doesn't use invisible walls, it uses blockages in order to stop you from trespassing to an area you're not supposed to get. So, it's got realism. In fact, that's the whole point of this game, that's the appeal. It's incredibly realistic. The fights play out as you would expect, with your gun, your bow eventually, your shotgun, and your classical machete. A lot of these fights can feel tense because they're an exact representation of what would happen in real life. You pull a gun, whether or not it has bullets, people will cower, and you can even push them back to get them at a certain distance from one another. So you can stab one in peace while the other one comes towards you, misses in time, and then you're able to kill them yourself. You can only take on one person at a time with a machete. While you're fighting one person with a machete, the other person can interrupt the animation, and you can stagger back. Thus, you cannot take on more than one person at a time. This is what gives this game a certain unique edge, because unlike any third-person shooter game, this one is completely new in its mechanics, in its approach to gameplay. Think of how you'd be in this situation in real life, how you'd approach this. This is how it'd all be done. You can flip to your items menu to consume food rations and stamina replenishments. My issue with this is that there's no animation for it, so mid-fight you can just go into the menu and then you can consume certain items in order to raise your health and your energy. It's not realistic in an otherwise very realistic game. And in terms of realism, your stamina, the way it beats when you're about to fall off the ledge, when you're almost to the destination you want to get. That's perfect. It adds so much tension because some of these climbing segments are so long. They're so stretched and painful and miserable because you feel like you're going to fall any time. You don't want to do the whole level again. That is what I would have loved if the levels were longer, they were more difficult. And again, I play this on the hardest difficulty you can, Survivor, and it's just not hard at all. I died 14 times. That's a real disappointment. But if you're new to video games and you don't want something particularly challenging or long, you just want something that you can play on Steam and something that you can get done in a few hours, you know, play like a casual gamer, even if you're not interested in video games, I highly recommend you play this game despite the fact that it lacks polish that it really needs. In terms of polish, the graphics, even for a 2012 game, aren't very good. They're not terrible by any means. They're passable, but they're not very good, and what would be great if they ever made a sequel or another game similar to this is they upped the graphics, they upped the visual style. The locations themselves are also very repetitive. You don't see much variety. Same with enemies. And after you've been introduced to the basic combat system, nothing really changes. You get a few more weapons, but even that doesn't really change up the gameplay that much. The game does line up, however, when you're fighting an entire horde of enemies at once, making for a difficult fight, a difficult struggle. A lot of this can be really stressful, especially with the heavily armored guards, where you have to aim at their head precisely in order to take them out, and bullets to the chest will not do anything or any other part of their body. When approaching a new conflict, the one thing in your mind is immediately, okay, how do I go about this? How do I take as little damage as possible? Or if I'm even more successful, no damage? Well, the answer is you take a look at the individuals you're confronted with. You take a look at who has the gun. Maybe multiple people have guns. You make sure to quick kill them first. Take their ammo, use it on the others, and then continue to finish off the remaining opponent with a machete. It's always satisfying doing this correctly, pulling it off while taking absolutely no hits. It makes you feel like a hero, a genius. That satisfaction you have when you take out an entire room perfectly, just the way you imagined. When you climb to that long destination you were hoping you didn't fall down from. It's just relief, and it's beautiful. This is because the game manages despair with reward. Because it's such a cruel looking world, cruel feeling world. The air is cruel. That pollution, that sadness, it's what keeps you going. And it's what makes killing each enemy and climbing each building more and more innovating. My favorite part of this game is when you have to infiltrate a boat. You have to go inside of it and you have to fight the guards there. Doing so means going into the darkness, deeper and deeper. And this is what sets an almost horror tone to it, which I really love. There's also this entire level dedicated to climbing a gigantic building, where, if you fall down, you'll have to start the whole thing all over again. This is one of those levels where it's not going to be remorseful to you. The problem is that it doesn't go on for long enough is my issue. If this level had gone on for maybe twice to 3 times the length, then dying would be a real penalty. But it's not, especially seeing that it does give you a midway checkpoint before the real climb begins, just when you're entering. This game does take you to amazing heights, because something like this, something so rare, so overlooked, one of a kind, truly, is incredible. It's incredible to know this game even exists, but it's not fleshed out. It never reaches beyond the basic standards it can hold itself to, that it decided to, because it feels unfinished. After beating this game, it just felt incomplete. I scratched my head and said, is this really it? Is this what I decided to play? Is this the ending? Is that all? And that comes to one of this game's greatest flaws, which is that it doesn't really have an ending. Yes, it ends, but that doesn't mean it has an ending. It's a cliffhanger incident. Nobody knows what happens to the protagonist, his wife. There's nothing that's resolved. In fact, all we're assured is that May is safe, which is nice, but it doesn't really give us any insight into the mind of our protagonist, into what he's feeling. That's because he doesn't really express his sensibilities. Now, I actually find the protagonist to be quite likable because he manages to speak, having a relatable young voice, so he's not a silent protagonist, and yet doesn't manage to be full of himself or act like he's a hero or a tough guy or anything like that. And I think that simplicity works in his favor. It works in the favor of all the characters in this game. But ultimately, he's forgettable, because he's just a blank slate. A bit like this game, when you really think about it. All these ideas, all this potential, none of it is taken to the extent it should be. None of it is explored enough. If this game was a project for a larger game to be released one day, and I hope it is, I really do, then it's a great beginning. It really is. It's a great starter pack. But it's not something that's going to hold you for that long, because the game's not very long. Also because there's these rough edges that you'll undoubtedly notice, such as the game repeatedly telling you over and over again the instructions it's informed you prior of. Your bow's never breaking, meaning that you can just retrieve endless ammo, making that the few bullets you do get in the game become pretty useless when you can just whip out your bow anyway.
I'll kill you.
Your time is up.
And backtracking through the same foggy, dusty city, through the same dust storms. That backtracking gets rather tedious, rather fast. If you're really looking for something new, as I was, and I received in some portion, even though it wasn't as refined as I would like it to be, I really recommend buying I Am Alive. It's definitely one of the more indie games out there for a third-person game. One developed by Ubisoft of all companies. Overall, it's pretty much a mixed muffin, honestly. But basing my experience upon how much I enjoyed it, I was always enjoying it. I loved every second of playing this. And it was just so refreshing to see something so new and enlightened. I just wish it caught on. I wish it was more established. Though with that said, I do recommend you buy it. It is truly one of the most creative and unique games I've ever played. And I really hope to see more of it, or at least stuff influenced by it, in the future.